older earth creationism. So in the next or the previous part, we looked at all earth creationism. Yes, we looked at all earth creationism, but the difference was that those four views that we looked at were actually what have they tried? They tried to interpret Genesis figuratively. That's what they have tried, right? Interpreted Genesis figuratively. But here, yes, here is a second group of people who are going to interpret Genesis literally. But we are going to see still they believe in ordered creationism. So let's look at one of the dominant views, right? That is Genesis chapter. All right, the view is gap theory. And by the way, before we go there, is there anyone? Do you have any idea about gap theory? Can anyone just give me some input about your understanding of gap theory? Any? No? Gap theory, okay. Gap theory is this one. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. We read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Right? And Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 says what? The earth was formless and void. The darkness was covered on the earth, and the Spirit of God, was moving on the earth. Yes. So this group actually teaches that there is a gap between Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and verse 2, right? Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and 1 verse 2, there is a gap, right? There is a gap. And when we talk about this gap, what are we to understand? They are saying this gap is not just a day gap or something like thousands and millions of years of gap is there between Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and 1 verse 2, right? So that gap actually will accommodate an old earth creationism. So what are the things that they are going to talk about here? We will see as we discuss, right? So the first theory is known as gap theory. They are talking about this gap, right? Now we are going to give them answer whether there is a gap or not, all right? But let's look at gap theory. Actually, it is actually in 1814, Thomas Chalmers was the first one who tried to harmonize scripture and science. And what he did was that he said, in a lecture, he set forth the detailed history of creation in the first chapter of Genesis begins at the middle of the second verse. That is what he was saying. This is what his idea. What you see in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 is the beginning of this creation. What do the creation, what do you see now? That means in the middle of verse 2, you can divide maybe, and the first half goes to the first earth, the old earth, and the second half goes to the new earth, like the earth that you see now. The idea is they're talking about one earth, but I wanted to say the earth is really old. Okay. And you also will see there was, they also call it as a pre-Adamic age. right? Pre-Adamic age was there. Before Adam, there were animals, there were birds, and they would say there were even human beings, okay, in an old earth. But they were sinful, and what God has to do, God had to come and destroy them, right? God judged the old earth, and they are saying that, okay, most probably God judged them by a flood, right? And what happened? Because of the judgment of that old earth, the earth became formless and void. Earth became formless and void. So all the fossils that you see, the fossils of dinosaurs and big and huge animals that you see now are not the present. It is not from this. It is actually it is, you know, in the pre-Adamic race time. You know, there was a race, something called as pre-Adamic race, and so there were human beings, there were animals, there were birds. So there was an old earth. God judged them, and what God actually did, God recreated the old earth, right? So that is what this theory actually says. Now, how this became famous. This theory became famous because of Scofield Reference Bible, and especially within the fundamental circles, they started to teach this theory because of Scofield Reference Bible. So that means Scofield Reference Bible is responsible for many of the wrong theories that happen, that are actually spread. So you would see in the old Scofield Bible or in the new Scofield Bible, you will see a reference for a gap theory. Okay, now let's look at the description. What is gap theory? Right? I know that this theory is taught in many of the Bible colleges in India. Right? Many Bible colleges teach us this one. Many, even among Baptists and among Pentecostals, they all, in many Bible colleges, you see this theory being taught, right? So that now you can say, okay, we have dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are not from the, because you don't see God creating dinosaurs in Genesis 1 somehow. And so we have, but dinosaurs were alive because fossil record clearly says, so it must be from a pre-Adamic race. All right, so let's look at the description. On a popular level, some have confused the statement by a few older commentators who supported the interval time between Genesis 1, verse 1, and 1, verse 2. Right? So this is same thing that I already explained. Not much. You can go to the notes to see some of the descriptions are there. Now they provide 5 supporting arguments. Okay, I am page number 60 at the end of that page. They provide 5 supporting arguments for gap. In order to claim there is a gap between verse 1 and 2. What are the 5 supporting arguments? First, right, tenet for the gap theory involves maintaining absolute semantic differences between create and make. All right, remember, Hebrew word for create is bara. Bara means create. And the Hebrew word for make is asa. Okay, bara and asa. Okay, so they are now, first of all, using these two words to say creation is actually, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There, God used the word bara, but later God used the word asha, right? Asha, to make. So the word bara is for creation, asha is for making again, maybe some kind of second creation. Second argument is this one. The nature of the initial conjunction at the beginning of verse 2. This is some of the argument from Hebrew grammar. What is the, see, for example, in English, we have a conjunction, right? We use the word and to put two words together, right? Similarly, in Hebrew, there is a letter. This letter is known as Waw. Okay, Waw is the letter. So what they are, so this when you put a Waw actually connects two verses together. But in Hebrew, a Waw can be used different way. Not all the time it is a coordinating conjunction. Okay, so let's look at the view. Second argument is the nature of the initial conjunction beginning of verse 2 allows for a time interval. Wo allows for an interval from with verse 1 and 2. That's the second argument. Third argument, the Hebrew verb translated was, remember this one? What is the second verse actually says? Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. The earth was formless and void, right? That's what you read. Earth was formless and void. Their argument is, it also can be translated became or had become. So if you translate Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, now let me show you how this actually is written, so that you will have more clarity on what we are talking here. 1 second. Okay. Okay. Are you able to see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, but there is, yeah.
Okay. All right. I am showing my screen from, talking about Genesis chapter 1. All right. So in Genesis chapter 1, we see, if you look at the Hebrew verse, I know that you don't know, you may not have learned Hebrew word, but it's right. All right, I have highlighted a word here, right? That is bara. It is a word to create, right? Then if I show you verse 2, all right, you can see verse 2. And if you look at the beginning of that verse 2, okay, I'm looking at a Hebrew, look at way down. All right, I highlighted a small letter in Hebrew, right? A small letter, that is wall, right? It is actually a conjunction, like in English we have and, but in Hebrew that can be translated various ways. Now, that's one of the argument we saw. The third argument, what they were saying, is this one. For example, in an ivy, you will see an ivy, the earth was formless and empty, right? Earth was formless and empty, right? Interesting Hebrew word is tohu wabohu, right? Tohu wabohu. Earth was formless and empty. NASB also would say this way: the earth was formless and void, like King James, you read, the earth was without form and void again, right? So you read that the earth was, all right? The Hebrew word actually is haya. Gap theory's argument is this one, that was, okay, was can be translated as became. Now, what is the difference then? If you translate, then the earth became formless and void. It will suggest that before it was not like this. Something happened to the earth, and therefore it became. So gap theories want to argue, yes, because of God's judgment, earth became void, formless, like this, right? So that is the argument. Okay, so did you understand what I was trying to say? From here, I'm talking about their argument. Okay, anyone? If you have understood.
Yes, Pastor. There is a gap between.
That's one. Yeah, I'm talking about their argument.
And it became, but it is slightly confusing because why was there judgment even before the earth was formed and it became?
Right. Yeah, we have a lot of we are going to make it say why they are wrong. We are saying there is no judgment. Before verse 2, there was no judgment. That's not our position, but we are talking about what they teach, what gap theorists teach. All right. The reason why they say is because the word, the word was, and then they also say the word formless and void. Right? Formless and void. Now let's look at the argument from their standpoint. Let's look at the argument. Okay. So they have 5 arguments to say that there is a gap. And the third argument was that Hebrew word translated was, all right, in verse 2, it can be better translated became or had become. And the fourth argument, formless and void, that is tohu wabohu, denotes a condition produced by divine judgment. It says the earth became wasteland. That is what their argument, formless and void, means. Fifth, the word darkness. Right? Darkness covered the earth, remember. So darkness symbolizes judgment. Right? So these are the 5 supporting arguments for gap theory. Right? 5 supporting arguments for gap theory. And we are going to look at from the Bible. Okay, now they are making this theories. Is it right? Is gap theory a right theory? That is what we are asking here. So let's look at evaluation of gap theory. The first argument, the use of create and make to support the gap theory, right? This is their argument. Advocates of gap theory maintain that create bara and make asa have absolutely distinct meanings. Okay? If Exodus chapter 20 verse 11, what is Exodus chapter 20 verse 11? For in 6 days the Lord made asa, the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. It establishes that the chronological limitation of God's creation in Genesis 1 was 6 days, then any significant interval time between Genesis 1 and 2 would extend beyond the required 6 days, right? Therefore, either Exodus chapter 20 verse 11 is erroneous, or some type of harmonization between Genesis 1 and Exodus chapter 20 verse 11 must be set forth. Since gap theorists have generally held to the inerrancy of the scripture, they harmonize the two texts by postulating that create and make have distinct semantic nuances. This is a necessary distinction if Genesis 1, all right, what we read, is to be harmonized with the 20 verse 11. In light of this, the gap theory rises or falls on the distinctive meanings or create and make. If these two verbs are semantically distinct, then gap theory have a valid argument. However, if these verbs are used interchangeably, then the gap theorists cannot, they have actually no argument. All right. So what is the first evaluation? Now we know that in Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, the word bara is used, right, to create. But same Moses, when he writes in Exodus chapter 20, he did not use the word bara. What did he use? He used the word asa, make, right? Within 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth. So, are there differences between these two words, or is it a synonym? What is synonym? You know the synonym, right? You can use a word interchangeably. So that would be the question to ask. Now, let's go again. Let's make it clear what is their argument, right? Listen carefully, because this is this is morning class. Now the problem is this is a little difficult to follow on, right? Unless we concentrate and put whole our mind into what we are discussing. All right. Now, this is the argument. Gap theory says verb bara means to create without aid of pre-existing material. That means out of nothing. Out of nothing. That is what they are saying. So whenever God used the word bara, it is creating something out of nothing. Second, the word made, that is asa, actually means restore. Make, that means already materials are there, God is restoring it. This is how they argue. Okay, so they point out, advocates of gap theory point out that outside of Genesis 1 verse 1, Bara is used in Genesis 1 as a reference to two other creative activities. So in Genesis 1, bara used two other times. One is in verse 21, that is creation of animal, and then three times in 27, that is a second verse, for creation of human life. So these three uses of create are the only places in this chapter, that is in Genesis 1, where God did not use any pre-existing material. They say God did not use any pre-existing material. In contrast to this, the term predominantly used in Genesis 1 actually is used to, the verb is to make, asa. And that suggests that God's emphasis in this chapter is on reshaping the heavens and the earth from a previously existing material that had previously been destroyed. Consequently, they would say God originally created a perfect and complete heavens and earth out of nothing, as Genesis 1 affirms. But what happened? What happened? They say because of Satan's fall, right? When did Satan fall? They would say in between verse 1 and verse 2. Remember Isaiah chapter 14? There is a question asked, when did you fall from heaven? Right? So they would put the Satan's fall in between verse 1 and 2. So what happened? Because of Satan's fall, God judged the earth as reflected in verse 2. So verse 2 is the reflection of God's judgment. But from verse 3 onwards, God began to restore the ruined earth in 6 successive literal days. So what you read in Genesis 1 mainly is restoration, right? Restoration. The use of Asa in Exodus 20 verse 11 reflects the same 6-day period of restoration as recorded in Genesis 1 verse 3 to 31. 3 to 31 is simply restoration. Okay? So this is what gap theorists would argue. All right, now let us go to the details and see their argument holds any water, or is it sustainable, right? While we agree, right, that the verb created may have distinct nuances, right, distinct nuances, the gap theory's absolute dichotomy superimposed on these verbs cannot be consistently defended in the various creation accounts in the Bible, right? We are going to look at that one. All right, now I have given, there are some information that are given from Dictionary of the Classical Hebrew, okay, and some books names are used there, right? If you want to know the details of those books, I can just maybe give you later. Now, so this is what we have to understand. Out of the verbs create or bara, it is used 48 times in the Old Testament. Bara used 48 times, okay? And the verb asa used 2,627 times in the Old Testament. All right. Now, of course, dictionaries would suggest, yes, the word create has more restrictive semantic range than make. That is right. But when the verb create is used in the basic Hebrew verbal form, don't worry about this one, right? This is the call stem, which is the basic form. The God of Israel is always its subject, and the direct object never refers to the material used with the verb create. All right. So what is the point that I say here? When this verb used in the basic form in Hebrew, the God of Israel is always its subject, and the direct object never, right? The object never refers to the material used with the verb create, right? It is not a reference to a material to create. The verb asa, to make, and judging by its general semantic nature, its ranges of uses is very broad. As we will contend, the verb create and make are both used in creation context as a reference to God's supernatural creative work. Though it is beyond the scope of this section to present all the grammar, but yes, we are just simply saying, the word asa is very broad, but both the forms asa and bara are used for God's supernatural creative work. Both forms are used. Just leave the Hebrew word, those arguments, I mean, this information that is given there, you don't have to mind it, all right? Now, if you look at the in these dictionaries, this is what you would see. In demonstrating the synonymous nature of these two verbs, we will look at two items. First, the verbs create, make are each used to describe same creative activities. Second, there are a number of passages where verbs are used together, right? Let's look at it. The first item that we should note is that the same creative activities are governed by both verbs. Now, let's look at, first of all, this is what we read in Genesis 1 verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So, God created, the word create, governed two objects. What are the two objects? Heavens and earth, right? Then the argument is right. God created heavens and the earth out of nothing. Did not use any pre-existing material, right? God did not use. Now, in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, what you read, that is the place where we are talking about Sabbath, right? In this text, Israel was commanded to work 6 days and to worship and rest on the Sabbath. That is God's way of, God said, 6 days you work, seventh day you rest and you worship. According to verse 11, this is what we read. The Lord made the heavens and the earth and sea and all that is in them. Look at this one. Made. What is the object? Okay, God made. What is the object? Heavens and the earth. So, what are we to understand? According to gap theory, in order for it to sustain, they have to prove that the verb made is used to make something out of something. Right? Let me explain one more time. They say create, the verb create, it is a create. When this verb is used, it refers to a creation out of nothing. And asa, that is a verb usually translated as make, right? When this verb is used, it is a reference to creation out of something. But look at, Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, where you read, the Lord made the heavens and the earth. The question should be asked, did God make heavens and earth out of something? That is a question. And the answer should be no. God did not use any pre-existing materials in order to create, or even make, right? So, as in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, God's creative work includes the heavens and the earth. It is again affirmed that the Lord made the same two objects in Exodus chapter 31, verse 17, where you would read, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth. 6 days the Lord made, all right? And then there is a verse, more detailed verse is given in Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 6. This is what we read, thou alone art Lord, thou hast made the heavens, heaven of heavens, and all their hosts, the earth. All right. So, what are we to understand? Bible uses these two terms synonymously. All right? Used these two terms synonymously. Bible does not make a difference where bara is creation, bara is a reference to creation out of nothing, and asa is a creation of out of something. No, Bible doesn't make that differences in these verses, right? For example, because asa is used to refer to the creation of heaven and earth, and we know from the Bible, and we understand from the Bible that God created everything out of nothing, right? Out of nothing. So asa is a synonym for creation. Okay. So if you can read my notes, you will just read one more time so that you have a proper understanding of these arguments that I made. And there's some more arguments are being made in this book about in these notes about the differences between bara and asa. All right. Okay. I need to just go a little further to the second idea. It is also a little tough, so I will take a few minutes to explain the second argument. Right, second argument. What is that? Grammatical allowance for a temporal gap. As I said, Hebrew uses a letter known as vowel to show conjunction, like in English it is and, right? So what you read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, you will see this one. So it is connecting two verses. But let's say, what do they say? Supporters of gap theory assume the grammatical conjunction, right, and or in Hebrew war, connecting with verse 1 and 2 allows for a temporal interval, temporal gap. And that's the reason it is known as gap theory, right? So gap theory generally assume this conjunction somehow supports or allows for time interval. Okay. Now, look at the next paragraph. Hebrew conjunction wall is placed at the beginning of Genesis 1 verse 2. Okay. It is placed at the beginning of verse 2. This is very common in Hebrew. It may be translated as 4 ways you can translate. And, now, but, and then. Okay, that word, how can it be translated? 4 ways. And, now, but, and then. And it may be a number of other ways, but these are the most common, right? So the point is this one. Mainly, this war can be divided into 2 broad categories, right? 2 broad categories. One is war consecutive and war disjunctive. Okay, 2 types of war. I'm just explaining. Don't even if it, you have not learned Hebrew, just understand that there are 2 types of categories of war. The war consecutive is clearly identifiable, right? War consecutive is identifiable. It is always attached to a verb and generally expresses sequential action. Okay. Now, war consecutive begins in verse 3. For illustrative purpose, let's look at the first few words in verse 3, and this is the way it would be written like this: woe, said God, let there be light. Right? So we should notice that woe is directly attached to the verb, which says that the action is sequence. Okay. Now, let me show you one more time how this is written here. Okay. Are you able to see my screen? Are you able to see? Okay. All right. Okay. I think you are able to see my screen.
Yeah, now we are able to.
Okay. Okay. Here's chapter 1, verse 2. You would see a war here, right? War here, and this is the war this is the letter that we are talking about. A war that is connected. So they say this war allows a temporal gap here. Okay, a temporal gap. So what is our argument? Let me show again. Okay, there are 2 types of war. One is war consecutive and war disjunctive. War consecutive is clearly identifiable. It is directly attached to a verb. Okay. For example, verse 3, if you have seen, let me show you verse. Okay, verse 3, you will see that it is attached to a verb, right? But in verse 2, it is not attached to a verb. All right, not attached to a verb.
Hello.
Okay. Yes. Was anyone asking a question? Okay. Let me explain here. So, let there be light. It is verse 3 where there is a verb is used and verb consecutive is used there. And the verb stands at the head of the clause with the subject following it. In addition, the creation of a localized source of light in verse 3 is a sequence that follows God's creation. So in the Bible, in Hebrew, verb consecutive is used, right? It is used with a verb, right? Not with a noun. And it is talking about sequential action. Sequential action. Okay. Now, in verse 1, okay. Okay. Now, in English, woe in verse 3 is readily translated as then, right? Then God said, let there be light. As this reflects, the woe consecutive is easily recognized in Hebrew because it is always used with the verb, right? With the verb, right? Now, what is interesting is that war consecutive is repeatedly used in virtually every verse in Genesis 1, right? And often more than once in many verses. For example, verse 3, verse 4, and in verse 3 there are 2 times, verse 4, 3 times, and in verse 5, 2 times, etc. So this reflects that Moses used a war consecutive to show a temporal sequence. All right, temporal sequence. If Moses had wanted to show the movement in time, he had to have clearly communicated a temporal interval by using war consecutive at the head of verse 2. But listen carefully. Now, in verse 2, war consecutive is not used, right? War consecutive is not used. The second war, the word disjunctive appears in verse 2 because the war or this and, or if you can translate then, is used with the word earth. Earth is not a verb, is a noun. Not a verb, a noun. That means this is not talking about time. It's not talking about temporal sequence. It is a disjunctive war. This war is also easily identifiable. It is always attached to a non-verbal form, right? Non can be an adjective, can be a substantive pronoun. All right, these are some of the things that you learn in the languages. All right, so for example, we could illustrate war disjunctive found at the beginning of verse 2 in this manner. War the earth, right? This is the war. The earth was void and formless. So word disjunctive relates it to preceding clause. It can be used in a number of different ways, such as introducing a clause of contrast or reason. So in this context, word disjunctive is best seen as an explanatory clause. Could be translated as now. All right. So when word disjunctive introduces an explanatory clause, it explains an item that had been introduced in the preceding words. Okay, that means there is an item introduced in verse 1, and verse 2 is the explanation of that item in verse 1. For example, earth is used in verse 1 and verse 2. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay. And now right here, the word war is used with the earth to explain this earth. Okay. So what is my point here? You may not have understood everything what I've said, but you will have to understand 2 things. That is, in order to understand this argument, the letter war in Hebrew is used 2 ways, or there are 2 categories of war. One is war consecutive, and second is war disjunctive. Okay, consecutive and disjunctive, 2 types of war. War consecutive is used with the verb only, right? Disjunctive is used with a noun, pronoun, or adjective, or it can be used. When it is used with a verb, it is talking about time, temporal sequence. But when it is used with a noun, it can have few ways to explain, but right here it is explanatory, introducing an explanatory clause. So the argument is, because it is word disjunctive, it is not talking about temporal or time. Rather, it is talking about explanation. So that means there is no way you can translate verse 2 as the earth became void. It's simply earth was void is the translation. And this is used in many places, right? For example, Genesis chapter 2, verse 12, right? Moses is recorded that the land of Havilah was known for its gold, right? And the name for the first river is Pishon. It follows that the whole land of Havilah where there is gold. And if you use this one, then you will see the disjunctive verb is used in many places, right? Now the gold of that land is good. Look at this now, right? Used with the gold. It is also same word disjunctive to explain. So here is my argument. My argument is this one. Actually, there is no time gap between verse 1, chapter 1, verse 1, and chapter 1, verse 1, 1, verse 2. There is no gap because the conjunction doesn't allow for a gap. All right, a conjunction used in Hebrew doesn't allow for a gap. If you understand that one, I think we are in a good shape.